The Harris-Biden Fight Against Democracy, a closer. Look at the First Amendment, Second Amendment, and voter ID laws. In recent years, debates surrounding the Democratic Party's stance on the First and Second Amendments and voter identification laws have intensified, sparking concerns about the very fabric of American democracy. The constitutional guarantees of free speech, the right to bear arms, and fair and transparent elections are foundational principles that safeguard the republic. However, recent actions by leading Democratic figures suggest that their policies may be steering the nation in a direction that undermines these protections and, in turn, democracy itself. Eroding the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, religion, press, and assembly, crucial to ensuring citizens have a voice in public discourse. However, Democratic initiatives in certain areas have raised concerns about a growing intolerance toward dissenting opinions, especially in the digital space and through the mainstream media. One example is the push for increased regulation of online platforms and social media companies to combat misinformation. While it's true that disinformation can be harmful, the question arises, who defines what constitutes misinformation? As platforms become more regulated, there is a risk that speech critical of the government, specific policies, or politically unpopular viewpoints could be suppressed. This kind of censorship, mainly when enforced or influenced by government entities, is fundamentally at odds with the First Amendment. A notable example occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic when social media platforms were pressured to deplatform individuals questioning government narratives around lockdowns, mandates, and vaccines. Dissenting voices, many of which had legitimate concerns, were silenced under the banner of public safety. These precedents set a dangerous tone, suggesting that opposing views are not welcome in the public square, a move that could ultimately weaken democratic discourse. Restricting the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, which protects the right to bear arms, is another area where Democrats have been accused of waging a war against constitutional freedoms. Democratic leaders have consistently pushed for more stringent gun control measures, arguing that they are necessary to reduce gun violence. However, the scope and reach of many of these proposals have alarmed defenders of the Second Amendment, who see them as part of a broader effort to disarm law-abiding citizens and erode the right to self-defense. Proposals such as bans on so-called assault weapons, limitations on magazine capacities, and mandatory buyback programs are often framed as common-sense measures. However, these initiatives could pave the way for a slippery slope of further restrictions, ultimately infringing on individuals' ability to protect themselves against criminals and, more importantly, potential government tyranny. Moreover, this approach ignores the fact that law-abiding gun owners are not responsible for the majority of gun violence in America. Instead, these measures could disproportionately harm individuals in vulnerable communities who rely on firearms for self-defense, especially in areas where law enforcement response times are slow. The fight against voter ID laws. Perhaps the most direct assault on democratic principles comes in the form of the Democratic Party's opposition to voter ID laws. Across the country, Democrats have repeatedly argued that requiring identification to vote disproportionately disenfranchises minority voters and those in lower income brackets. However, when implemented correctly, voter ID laws are designed to ensure the integrity of elections, a cornerstone of democracy. Requiring a valid voting ID is a common-sense measure used in many democratic nations worldwide. It helps prevent voter fraud, such as double voting or voting by ineligible individuals. By opposing these laws, Democrats risk undermining public trust in the electoral process, feeding into narratives that elections are neither free nor fair. Furthermore, the argument that voter ID laws are inherently discriminatory is weak. Identification is required for daily activities, from opening a bank account to boarding an airplane. Providing access to affordable or accessible IDs could address concerns about disenfranchisement without compromising the integrity of elections. Without solid voter ID laws, the potential for fraud increases, which ultimately harms democracy by diluting the votes of law-abiding citizens. A fight against democracy? The Democratic stance on these three critical issues reveals a troubling pattern. The erosion of free speech rights. the infringement on the right to bear arms, and opposition to voter ID laws all point toward a broader trend of centralizing power and reducing the ability of individual citizens to participate in and protect the democratic process freely. Democracy thrives when citizens can express their views, defend their rights, and participate in fair elections. By undermining these critical pillars of democracy, the Democratic Party may inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, be steering the country toward a more authoritarian future where dissent is stifled, citizens are disarmed, and elections are less transparent. For a true democracy to survive, we must uphold and defend these constitutional protections rather than erode them for temporary political gain. It is essential to consider that protecting democracy means safeguarding all rights, not just those that align with a specific political agenda. Without these protections, the very system Democrats claim to defend will continue to erode, risking not only the rights of individuals, but also the future of democracy itself.